if you're just joining us, open your Bibles to Habakkuk, the small minor prophet, Habakkuk chapter 3. And we're going through this series, Hope for Hard Times. And today we're talking about holding on to the promises of God when life hurts, when life gets really hard. Here's the thing, for every problem that you face in life, I want to remind you today that the Bible has a promise for it, that God has given a promise to answer that problem. Some say that in the Bible there are more than 3,000 promises that God has given to us, and we're gonna cover all of them this morning. We're gonna be, by about 3 o'clock, I hope to be done. Now, when we look at chapter 3, we're going to see that Habakkuk starts to look back at the history of the nation of Israel, and he says, God, what you did for the people when they were in Egypt, do it again for us. Keep those promises for us. We're going to hold on. And when you read chapter 3, it's written as a prayer. The whole chapter 3, it's a prayer, but it's also a song. It's put to music. And the people of Israel, when they hit hard times, they would start to sing this prayer, God, do it again, just like we just sang. I love it. And what we're going to see this morning is that God makes a lot of promises. So God is a promise maker. But better than that, he's a promise keeper. And his promises that he makes aren't just, our hope isn't just based on wishful thinking. Our hope is based on the promises that God makes. He makes these covenant promises with us, that if we are his people, then these promises are for us. And Habakkuk says, no matter how bad life may be crashing down on me right now, I will still have hope and joy because of the promises that God has made. I said, God is a promise maker and he's a promise keeper. You know what he's not? He's not a promise breaker. Don't raise your hand. This is a rhetorical question, but have you ever known a promise breaker? All right, you had friends that seemed to break every promise they made. I asked my wife, Veronica, this week, I said, can you think of anyone that's broken a promise to you? And right away she said, oh yeah, in 7th grade. Her mind goes straight back to a promise breaker. I said, what happened? She said, well, they lived about 45 minutes east of the Bay Area in a town near Concord. And one of their relatives came to visit from Mountain View. And this relative, when she was explaining to the kids, and so Veronica was in 7th grade and she had elementary school brothers and sisters, and high school, there were 6 of them brothers and sisters, and this relative said, I live in Mountain View, right by Marriott's Great America, and all the kids go, Marriott's Great America, and this relative said, would you want to go sometime? They said, would we want to go? We'd give our right eye to go to Marriott's Great America. We never get to go to Marriott's Great America. So the relative said, well, I'll take you. Anytime you want to go, just let me know. You can go for free. She said, Marriott, shoot, that's like, I own the place practically. I have so many friends that work there. I'll get you in for free. That's my stomping ground. I'll take care of you kids when you're ready. So they called her. That next thing they said, can we come on Saturday? She said, oh yeah, you come on Saturday. Just show up around 9 o'clock. I'll be waiting for you. Well, they show up. That her older brother piles all the younger kids in the car, elementary, junior high, high school, all the kids pile in the car. They drive almost an hour to Mountain View. They get to this relative's house. They ring the doorbell and nobody's coming. So they all start banging on the door, yelling for this relative who's going to get them into Marriott's for free, and nobody's answering the door. So they start to walk around the house looking to see all the curtains are closed, the back door is locked, and then it hit them that this relative was a promise breaker, not a promise keeper. And so Veronica says, instead, they just went to the San Jose swap meet. Oh, it's kind of a sad story, isn't it? It's not, some of you are laughing, but it kind of scars you. You don't forget that. But I would say this, if you're in 4th grade, shoot, Marriott's Great America, San Jose swap meet, about the same, isn't it? It's just about the same. But here's the thing, God is so much different than people who we try to trust. I have this key idea, if you want to write this thought down and take it with you. For every hard time in life, God has given us a promise. And that's true. So if life feels like it's falling apart and you want to give up, hold on to the promises of God. So I said we're in Habakkuk chapter 3. Turn there with me, and I want to start reading in verse 1. And I want to go through Habakkuk 3 and pull out several promises that he points us to. And the first one is in verse 1. We read this, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet. with orchestra. How do you like that? All right, so this prayer is meant to be sung. I'm stopped in my tracks. I'm down on my knees. So here's the thing. Habakkuk is in trouble, and he doesn't preach a sermon. He doesn't give a speech. He doesn't make a list of complaints. Habakkuk starts to pray. And here's the lesson there. For anyone who feels desperate in life, pray. Desperate people pray. I think prayers of desperation are something that we instinctively do as human beings. No matter who you are or what you believe in life, if you're on, it's like being on the top of a ladder trying to hang your Christmas lights. If you've been there and the ladder starts to buckle and give way, you instinctively reach out to grab for the roof or for a branch because you're falling. In the same way, when we hit desperate times, one of our first reactions is to pray. Desperate people pray. They say there's no atheists in foxholes. They say this too. People in foxholes pray. Desperate people pray. People who are desperate for their marriage to work, they pray. People who feel desperate about their kids, they pray. People who are in a desperate job search, they pray. And here's the good news about the Bible is that God listens to those prayers. In fact, the Bible almost encourages, it certainly doesn't discourage prayers of desperation. There's this woman named Hannah in the Old Testament we read about. She wants to have a baby. And so she goes to the temple and she drops to her knees and she starts to weep and she starts to haggle with God and plead and interrupt God and with her prayers. Desperate people pray. Here's the good news about God and people who pray desperate prayers is that God is gracious enough to listen to our prayers of desperation. Even if he hasn't heard from you in years, he still hears them. He's still gracious enough to go, okay, I haven't heard from you in quite a while, but today I'm still listening. For some people, their desperate prayers become the start of a spiritual life, and God hears those. I love this line in the book of Revelation. And in the 8th chapter of Revelation, we have this line that reads, the prayers of the saints went up to heaven. And the saints, that's you. That's people who fall. They reached heaven, and we read this, that heaven was silent for about 30 minutes. Everything stopped. When the prayers of the saints reached heaven, then heaven stopped. Do you get what's happening? Your prayers interrupt heaven. Your prayers stop God in his tracks, and it calls him to action. And so if you feel desperate today, then pray. And when you pray, can I encourage you to do this? Pray for a miracle. If you're facing hard times, don't pray a small prayer. Pray for a miracle. I've been a pastor for a long time, and I've been in a lot of small groups, a lot of Bible studies. I've heard a lot of good Christians pray. And I don't think so many Christians today think they can pray for a miracle. I hear prayers that I would describe as prayers to a cul-de-sac God, as though God just lives at the end of your cul-de-sac and he can do little nice things like we pray for safety. We pray for travel journey mercies. I don't even know what that means, but people pray for journey mercies, but you pray for that. People pray for sick pets and better weather. Don't pray for better weather. That prayer's already been answered. We have cooler weather already. But I don't know if I hear so many people pray for a miracle. Can I encourage you today, if you are desperate, if you're hurting, then start a miracle list and say, God, I'm praying for a miracle today. And he hears those prayers, and then he goes to work. Jesus says this is John chapter 14. He says, you can ask anything in my name and I will do it. That's a pretty audacious promise. This is Jesus' brother James. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. Those are your prayers. So here's our first promise is when life feels desperate, pray. Here's a second promise. What God did before, he will do it again. So look at verse 2 with me, and Habakkuk says, I've heard what our ancestors say about you. Do among us what you did among them. Isn't that a great request? Work among us as you worked among them. So Habakkuk is reminding everyone who sings this prayer, and he's saying to God, he says, what you did for the people of Israel before when they were slaves, do that kind of thing for us. Again, you did it before, you can do it again. That's what God has promised to us. When we talk about the land where the people of Israel were going to, Canaan, what do we call it? We always say it's the promised land. They were people of a promise. God made this promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. Then he makes it to his son Isaac, then to Jacob. And then finally he makes the same promise to Moses. We read this in Exodus chapter 3. And God says this, so Moses has met God in the burning bush. He's speaking and he's down on his knees, on his face. And God says, I promise that I will bring you up and out of your misery in Egypt. I promise that I will bring you up out of your misery and into the land of Canaan, into the promised land. And maybe that's your prayer today. God, will you bring me up out of my misery? This hard time is too much. And God promises to do what he did before. He will do it again. And I want to invite you to think about this. Sometimes we're facing something big and hard, and we think it's impossible for God. Can I invite you to look back in your life? Because if you're like me, I face something big and I forget that God has worked miracles before, things that were impossible. He's done it before. And I just need to say, God, will you do it again? And maybe that's where you are. I think we forget quickly or sometimes what God has done in the past. Here's a third promise in Habakkuk chapter 3. When you're in trouble, God rescues. That's what he does. Habakkuk 3, I'm going to start in verse 3 and just read the first line. God is on his way. When I read this a couple of weeks ago and started preparing, I highlighted this line. God is on his way. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's such a great line. God is on his way. And what's he on his way to do? You come to save your people, to save your anointed. When you're in trouble, I want to encourage you with this. When you're in trouble, then say, God, you've promised to come rescue. Come rescue me. If you're facing a hard time, say, God, come and rescue me. Isn't it a great feeling when you know that someone is coming to your rescue? Maybe you're facing a financial hard time, but someone has promised to come and rescue you. Or maybe you're lonely and alone, but somebody is coming to rescue you from that. It's a great feeling to know when someone is coming to rescue you. There's a rescue story this week in Arizona. I don't know if you read about it or heard about it, but it happened on Wednesday. Actually, the story started on Monday. On Monday, a guy near Wickenburg, his name is John Waddle. He tells his neighbor, Terry, he said, I'm going up to the hills to look for gold, all right? All right. First, can I just pause and say there's no gold in the hills, all right? Everyone who wants to go climb Superstition Mountain and look for the lost Dutchman's your treasure, it's not there, all right? You're just gonna die in the heat in the summer. So anyway, this guy John tells his neighbor Terry, he said, I'm going to look for gold up in the hills. If I'm not back by Tuesday, which is the next day, will you come look? That was this week. Please come look for me. And Terry says, sure, I'll do that. So he leaves. He doesn't come back Monday night. Tuesday, Terry's looking around, John's not anywhere. And people ask Terry, so did you go and look for him? He says, well, I was busy on Tuesday, so I went on Wednesday. Who does that? Your friends, hey, I gotta run to like Target, but I'll be there tomorrow. Anyway, so fortunately, he goes up and he starts walking around the gold mines in the hills. He kind of knew where John was heading. And he hears, help, help, help. And he goes over to this mine shaft and he looks down, and 100 feet down is his friend, John Waddle. And he goes, are you okay? He says, yes, I'm just thirsty and hungry. It's been 2 days. There's so much should have been 1 day. And so he climbs up on a hill, calls 911 because the guy's way down there. John said he was rappelling down the mine shaft to look for gold when his carabiner broke. All right, and he's by himself. Not a smart, great guy. I'm sure he's smart, but anyway, so the paramedics come and the rescue, and a guy rappels down there. Here's John. He has a few broken bones. He's fine. He also has 3 dead rattlesnakes around him that he killed. It was not a good couple of days down in the mine shaft. But when they pulled him up, they said, John, were you worried that you might die down there? And he says this, he says, no. He said, I knew my friend Terry was coming. Now, it might take him a couple of days, but I knew Terry was coming. But it's a really good feeling. You don't worry much if you know somebody is coming to rescue you. I think when you think about your life, there have been moments in all of our lives when we wished, hoped somebody would come and rescue us. I think it's just part of the human condition. We end up in bad situations and we need someone to rescue us. I think it's true in probably all people because we see it in fairy tales and in Disney movies. Just practically every fairy tale and every Disney movie is about somebody needing to be rescued. It's like when one of my sons was about 2 years old, he had a babysitter. Her name was Angelica, and she was in our college ministry at the time. And every time she came over, Little Mermaid had just come out, so she would hit play on Little Mermaid. And every time she came out, he would in the little bit of English he spoke, he'd say, "Play Little Mermaid," and she'd play Little Mermaid. Finally, one night she's coming to babysit, and she brings him a Little Mermaid doll of Ariel. All right, you guys remember Ariel? And gives it to my 2-year-old son, and I pull Veronica in the other room. I go, oh no. I said, can he have the doll? It's a doll, it looks like a Barbie kind of. He should be playing with G.I. Joes and things like that, I think. And she says, relax, Palmer, it's fine. Just let him, he likes Ariel a lot. I said, yeah, everybody does. Anyway, so he holds on to the doll for several years, all right? But that's not the point of the story. He's fine. He's doing fine. The point of the story is this, is that Little Mermaid is a rescue story from beginning to end. It's about rescue. First, you have this young guy named Eric. It's his birthday. He goes out on a boat. Remember this? He falls overboard and he's drowning. And a mermaid named Ariel comes and rescues him and saves his life. But then she is held captive by the evil octopus and she needs to be rescued. And her prince, now Prince Eric, comes and rescues her. You see, the need for being rescued, it's in every person. And so maybe your prayer, if you're facing hard times today, is to say, God, come and rescue me. You've promised, God. Claim that promise that our God is a rescuing God. There's one final promise that I want to look at in Habakkuk, and it's this. And verse 4, when life comes crashing down, you can start again. Let me read verse 4. I see God moving across the deserts. He's coming to Chandler and Gilbert and Tempe. I just added that part, but he's coming across the desert. His brilliant splendor fills the heavens, and the earth is filled with his praise. His coming is as brilliant as the sunrise. Rays of light flash from his hands, and his awesome power is hidden, where his awesome power is hidden. So there's this amazing metaphor. Probably my favorite metaphor in all the scripture is of sunrise. A new day is starting. And Habakkuk has this line, his coming is as brilliant as the sunrise. So picture that. God is giving you a brand new day to start again. I think new days, sunrises, and new days are God's gift to you. Yes, the sunrise is a metaphor, but it's also a reality. It's also a thing that every day you have this chance to start again. And life is like that as followers of Jesus Christ, that we get new circumstances. We can start new jobs. We get new opportunities. We can make brand new friends. A new day is a chance to hit the reset button, I think. The psalmist and songwriter David, he writes this in Psalm chapter 30. Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes in the morning. Maybe you need that. Maybe you've been going through a dark night of the soul and you need to know that joy is coming. I want to remind you that brand new days are God's second chances to you. They're a chance, like this sunrise that Habakkuk writes about. God gives you those all the time. He says, you can start again. Some see that God gives people in Scripture so many second chances. Some have named him the Lord of second chances. I love that. Because we all need a second chance. I think the need for a second chance runs deep in us. We have this sense in us that I wish I could do it again. I know this is especially true, especially for golfers, because the guys I play golf with will grovel and beg for a second chance. They'll even lie for a second chance. They'll say things like, Palmer, you moved in my backswing. I've had guys say it. I said, I just crossed my legs. They say, you can't cross your legs when I'm swinging in my backswing. They'll say a plane went over, a jet. I'll say it was 50 miles away. You could barely hear the thing. I need a mulligan. But in golf, a second chance is called a mulligan, and so they're always begging for a mulligan. We sell mulligans at our annual golf tournament. They're like, I think it was $5 a mulligan, maybe, was it $10 a mulligan this last time? We had to put a limit because people were buying as many mulligans. Kyle had to cut it off. People would buy the whole roll. That's how bad golfers want a second chance. And wouldn't it be great if all of life was like that? Let's say you could buy these mulligans and then you're going down the road and a police officer pulls you over on his motorcycle and he goes, hey, Leadfoot, you're doing 60 and a 45. And you say, well, officer, I was at the Grove Golf Tournament and I bought these mulligans, so I'm just gonna take a pass today. Wouldn't that be nice if you could do that? You're supposed to have a midterm exam. You don't study a bit, you fail, and the teacher tries to give you a D- and or an F, and you go, teacher, I'm just gonna give you a mulligan today. We're gonna do this over. I think more seriously, it would sure be nice to have mulligans for our children on the days when we're short with them and raise our voice at them. It'd be nice to have a mulligan on the days when we've said something cruel to a husband or a wife, or maybe you hurt a friend with your words. Wouldn't it be nice to say, let me start again? But God gives us this promise that with him, we can start again. God specializes in second chances. And that need for a second chance, like I said, it runs deep in all of us. Maybe you need a second chance with somebody who you love. Maybe you need a second chance at work. Maybe you need a second chance with your son or your daughter or your mother or your father. And God is really good at giving us second chances. The Bible calls it grace. It's kind of like this. One of my wife's favorite movies is a movie called The Notebook. Maybe a few of you have seen it. I watched it with her once. And there's a scene in it where you have Allie and Noah, right? And they're in love. And they're out on this piece of land that Noah owns. And they're walking along the river. And Allie starts to describe her dream house. And she says, Noah, could you build me a house one day that's a big 2-story house, and could you paint it white? And could you paint the shutters blue? And could you give me a room upstairs where I could look out over the river and paint? And so Noah says, sure, anything else? And she says, yes. She said, could you put a giant porch that wraps around the whole house so that we can sit out on the porch when the sun is setting and sip tea and look at the river? And he says, okay, I'll do that. And she says this, she said, Noah, do you promise? And he said, I promise. So she says, good. And that's the end of the conversation. But then Allie starts to think she would be happier with somebody else. So she leaves Noah. And you're like, what is she thinking? But Noah is a promise keeper. So do you know what Noah does? He starts building a house with his bare hands, with a hammer and a saw. And he builds this big 2-story house. And he paints it white, and he builds a wraparound porch with a room upstairs that overlooks the river, and he paints a house white, and he paints the shutters blue. And then he sits on the front porch, and he just waits. And sure enough, Allie realizes that the man she's with is not the person she loves. And she wants to go back to Noah, but she's not sure if he will have her back. But she comes back, and they fall in love again. He gives her a second chance because Noah is a promise keeper. And in that story, we get just a glimpse of what God is like, that God makes promises and he's a promise keeper. And then he gives us all a second chance. And I don't know what's hard or what's happening in your life, but if you need a second chance today, then I invite you to come to God and say, God, you're the Lord of second chances. You've promised to give me a second chance, and he will. This church, I hope you know that this church is a place for everybody who needs a second chance. It's one of the reasons I talk about this reclaimed wood we have around the room. And I said, it's just like that. This room may have been on a house in Detroit. Maybe it was a crack house in Detroit. And now it's in a worship house. I just kind of made all that up. But it's like our lives. We all need and we all get a second chance.